Welcome to the 707, a weekly half-hour program produced by KRCB, a service of NorCal Public Media. The 707 features voices and stories from your community, stories that explore our shared history, and stories that show how we are connected to each other. I'm your host, Michelle Marques. The Museum of Sonoma County is not just a place to see great art, it's also a repository of Sonoma County's history. For the next month, the museum is sharing the history of Postal service here, and this particular building is the perfect place to host it, since the Museum of Sonoma County used to be the Santa Rosa Post Office.
We're standing in, this is the 1910 Santa Rosa Post Office building, and it was built about that time, partly because the 1906 earthquake, which people usually are like, oh, it's the San Francisco earthquake, right? Which it was, but it wiped out. Santa Rosa was totally devastated by that earthquake. So we often talk about this building as kind of one of the symbols of Santa Rosa rising up out of the ashes of the 1906 earthquake. So it was a big deal for Santa Rosa to get this building. It was really, I think, one of the first kind of really substantial, and it's kind of in the federal style. It's got columns on the front. It was designed by James Knox Taylor, who's considered the national architect. It was a big deal for 1910 Santa Rosa to get a building of this kind of stature and elegance, I guess, and permanence.
That's Eric Stanley, Curator of History and Deputy Director of the Museum of Sonoma County. He's standing in the main gallery with me. When Stanley refers to James Knox Taylor as the national architect, he means it. There are dozens of federal buildings attributed to him as the supervising architect of the U.S. Department of Treasury during a 15-year period from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. Many of his buildings are on the National Register of Historic Places. This imposing structure in Santa Rosa was our post office until about 1965, when the city outgrew it and moved to the current site on 2nd Street. It housed various things for the next 10 years until the nation's bicentennial approached in 1976.
All across the country, they were doing different projects. And in Sonoma County, it was similar. There was a bicentennial commission, and they landed on the idea of creating a museum for Sonoma County. And that was their idea.
And there hadn't been one up until that point?
There had been some, I don't know if you'd fully call them museums. There have been some wacky places, some sort of museums, but not really. And so that was their idea. This is a county with a region with a really rich history, and that was the idea. That's what we're going to do. But then ensued the effort to find a home for it, and there were all kinds of different ideas and lots of fighting and arguing, and then they kind of landed on the old post office building. But that was also simultaneous with kind of redevelopment in downtown Santa Rosa, big part of which was making way for the mall, which they were going to build downtown. So they were wanting to demolish lots and lots of buildings. And so there had to be an effort to save this building because it was in the way of that development of the mall.
Stanley is referring to the Santa Rosa Plaza, which would become our second official mall after Cottingtown. But Stanley says there was hesitation from both the city of Santa Rosa and the county of Sonoma as to who would actually pull the trigger to demolish a structure with such history. While they wanted to get it out of the way, no one wanted to be remembered as the one who tore it down.
There was a historic local architect who essentially on the sly, without telling anybody, nominated it to the National Register of Historic Places. That was the tricky maneuver that delayed what would have been the demolition, but it only delayed it. So there was still a lot of arguing over it, but eventually they came up with the money to just move the entire building, which this is a marble, brick, stone, I think it's like a 1,600-ton building. It's crazy. It's not an easy building to move, and so they had to find someone to move it. Essentially, they put it out to like international bid and got 4 responses of companies that could actually do it.
And there's a photo here. So tell us about this.
Oh yes. So this is, and we have like hundreds and hundreds of pictures of the whole process of this move, where they would dug away the foundation. They put jacks in the basement and really just broke the whole building up off its foundation. And then you can see they put it on giant wooden skids, essentially, and then They had steel rollers.
Within the exhibit at the museum, they have a chunk of a steel roller 3 inches in diameter that was used to move the building.
They were long rods, just like putting it on and just rolling it slowly over. And then there's lots of jokes because this was 1979 by the time they're actually moving it. And people are like, oh yeah, I watched the building moved. And it was supposed to take like 8 days to move it about 750 feet. And it ended up taking 79 days. and people are like, aha, you go out and you'd sit there and try to watch the building move, and it didn't, it really didn't move. And so people make lots of jokes about how slowly it moved, but it did find its way over here and then was restored by the same historic architect, Dan Peterson, who was the one who on the slide nominated it to National Register. He did all the restoration.
Peterson was able to get the museum onto the National Register of Historic Places, and it was eventually opened as our museum in 1985. But of course, while this aspect of our postal history is strange and wonderful, it's only a small chapter in the storied past of our postal service.
Sonoma is the third place in California to have a post office. There's only 2 other post offices that predate a post office in the town of Sonoma, and that's partly related to the way California came into the Mexican-American War, and the places that ended up with post offices were the main areas. The only 2 that predate Sonoma are San Francisco and Monterey, and those would have been places where the military ended up. And that's also part of the story, that it's one of the first places in California to receive official mail under the military's jurisdiction. We're talking about in the 1840s.
The exhibit also has photos and artifacts from other Sonoma County post offices. Stanley says at the time, having a post office was usually something a business owner added on to an existing store.
We have a picture over there that's an early post office in Guerneville. He had a jewelry store, a Wells Fargo something, and a post office. So that's the way these places work, because if you got a mail contract and you had another store, well then you got a huge advantage. You have people.
You got foot traffic.
Absolutely guaranteed foot traffic. It's hard to think about now in the age of instant communication and whatever, to think about how important a post office was. It was really literally your connection to the outer world. So if you have, everybody was coming to the post office, and post offices became a place to gather. People would come and wait for the mail, right? The mail would be delivered. And it's funny, you can look through the newspapers and you'd see, okay, the mail's going to be delivered at this time and at this time coming off the train, and everybody's waiting for it. And then they would literally publish the names of the people who did not pick up their mail in the newspaper. So that's a different world, right? This is a complete, like here, Louise Smith did not pick up her mail, right? That kind of thing.
Can you imagine being like called out?
Yeah, no, I know. Is that you're shamed? I was like, oh no, I didn't pick up my mail. So that's that aspect of it, which also kind of puts in a context how important this building was, because this was not a jewelry store and post office. This was the post office and federal building. It was meant to be this permanent, dedicated, post office, and so that was a very different thing.
As rural service expanded and people didn't have to come to the main post office to get their mail, strange things started to make their way into carriers' bags.
And like we have this always fun, these are hen specks, which, like I was saying, for an agricultural county, these are little blinders that were supposed to prevent your chickens from pecking at each other.
What? And they're wearing little glasses?
Yes. Right, I love those because they're
hen specks.
Yes, hen specks.
Okay.
And so you could order them via parcel post, and that was the way you could, a big bulk.
Okay, I have to take a picture of this. This is too funny. I desperately want a pair of hen specks.
for your chicken?
I'll get a chicken so I can have them wear hen specks. I don't have a chicken yet.
And then, another thing we kind of highlighted that I like a lot is because Santa Rosa's most famous, or one of his most famous residents, was Luther Burbank, who was the horticulturalist who developed all kinds of plants, and he was, in his day, was really world famous. He was sort of like Thomas Edison and in that same kind of vein, and he was an industry unto himself. And in this 1912 photograph, so not long after, a couple years after this post office opened, this was the busiest day of the post office, was a mailing from the Luther Burbank Press. That was the busiest day. And this entire room full of people, they're only working on Luther Burbank's mailings.
Wow.
So all of these women who are in the picture here, that's all they're working on, all these boxes. Our main gallery is the main sorting. This is this room.
Oh.
And so that would have been the sort of the busiest day at the post office. And
like 20 women all working on packages. Wow.
All for that. And so his seed packets would have been mailed out, his seed catalog, so this is going out internationally. It's going out all over the world. And so this, again, is this building, this room was this hub of kind of international communication.
Yeah, and all of that, those seeds, think about that.
I know, they're
right?
They're spread all over the place. Yeah, I know. That is kind of, fascinating to think about. And Burbank's great because he's one of those guys that was so famous. Look at some of these early ones that were just like Luther Burbank, Santa Rosa, and you'd mail it to him and it would get there. And then he got so much mail that he had a rating system. So you see this one that's got a hashtag on it. If it was interesting to him, it got one hashtag. More interesting, 2 hashtags. So that's his own rating system because he got so much mail from people all.
It's kind of like Santa Claus. You just write Santa Claus North Pole and it gets to him.
It gets there. Yeah, for sure. You're guaranteed it's going to get there.
In the center of the main gallery, a model of an early airplane takes up much of the space.
And then the other piece, of course, for this exhibition is our centerpiece here, which is a replica, is a model, about a half-scale model of the airplane that made essentially the world's first airmail delivery, which was between Petaluma and Santa Rosa in 1911.
In the next segment of the 707, you'll hear how an intrepid gearhead built his own plane and was the first to ever carry a piece of mail through the skies. You are tuned to KRCB, Sonoma County's NPR station.
KRCB is Sonoma County's NPR station. Wondering what makes us stand out? It's simple, our unwavering commitment to this community. Morning Music, hosted by Brian Griffith, sets the perfect tone for your day.
Brian here with you on Sonoma County's NPR station.
As the sun climbs high, join Doug Jane for Midday Music.
Doug Jane with you. Thanks for tuning in.
It's the soundtrack of Sonoma County. Then, stay informed with All Things Considered, featuring insightful reporting from the KRCB newsroom, ensuring you're always in the loop.
For Manzana, the company that helped keep Sebastopol's famous Gravenstein apple alive, their 103rd year in business will be their last.
Your home for the best in local news and music. Because when the community sings, we're here to listen. Your radio, your stories, your station. KRCB 104.9, Sonoma County's NPR station.
Welcome back to the 707 on KRCB. I'm your host, Michelle Marques, and I'm standing inside the Museum of Sonoma County, which used to be Santa Rosa's Post Office from 1910 to about 1965. Eric Stanley, Curator of History and Deputy Director at the museum, is showing me around the current exhibit, which is up through the end of August. The exhibit is called It's in the Mail, and it explores Sonoma County's postal history. In the center of the main gallery is a replica of the plane that carried the first piece of mail via airmail in the world in 1911.
There was a man named Fred Wiseman who was a Sonoma County person. I don't think he was born here, but he came here at a young age and was living here. And he was, like a lot of other people, first fascinated with bicycles and then with cars. That was kind of usually, if you were mechanically inclined, that's where you're going. And then he became a race car driver, and he was in Ohio, and he saw a display about the Wright brothers and their plane. And he thought, I can build that. And so he came back home to California and actually built 2 planes. I'm sure they were almost the same and probably shared parts and all of that. But the first plane that he built was the first California-built plane to ever achieve flight. So he did that here in Sonoma County and up along, if you drive up 101 a little ways towards Windsor, there's the Business Standard Structures, which is up there. That was the field in which he was testing his planes. And then he built his second plane, which was probably hybridized from his first plane, became the plane that made the first ever airmail delivery. Now, of course, it was a stunt. He had a few letters, including a letter from the postmaster in Petaluma, some press Democrat newspapers, and a few things, and then he just took off in his plane in February. I think it was in February, yeah, and he got up, had engine trouble, went down like just after a couple minutes. So his goal was to fly from Petaluma up to the Santa Rosa, the fairgrounds. So he had to wait a day, fix the engine, get it all repaired, move the plane, took off again, and then flew for quite a ways, and then had a guide wire break and get in his propeller, and then he crashed again and went down again, and then they picked up the mail from him and by car and delivered it the rest of the way. But that was the first ever sanctioned flight by a post office official. Now there are other kind of candidates, and you can really start to split hairs on who's official, and because, whether he's sworn in as a postal carrier and all that, but essentially it's the first airmail delivery. The actual plane hangs at the Postal Museum at the Smithsonian.
This happened in 1911, and regular airmail service didn't start until about 1918, so Wiseman was definitely a pioneer, or at least great at getting attention. As Stanley shows me more of the artifacts in the exhibit, I notice a rather ordinary object under a glass enclosure.
Love it. Okay, cool. What else have we got here that's fun? What is that log?
Well, this gets into a little bit in the weeds, but this is about the early mail delivery routes and how the mail flowed in Sonoma County. There's a little oddity to it. This is about kind of how important post offices were. They had real naming conventions. You had to be careful about how you named it. If you lost your post office, your town was probably going away, and that kind of thing. So they were really linked up to how towns formed and how towns were named. And the early post office that was the centralizing post office in Sonoma County was called the Bodega Post Office, which is very confusing because the Bodega Post Office was in Sebastopol. And this is very early, so this would have been like early 1850s. There was a market in the area, and it's a kind of a reflection of our Spanish and Mexican roots in California, and that they just called it Bodega as a name. So that ends up being called the Bodega Post Office, which becomes confusing with the town of Bodega. The town of Bodega's post office was called Smith's Ranch. So they finally got that corrected in like 1868, and they swapped it around. So this weird log here is actually the flagpole from that Bodega in Sebastopol post office. It was the flagpole that sat outside it. And we had a lot of fun with this because it's not the most attractive artifact, and this has been sitting in our and so honestly we were like, oh my gosh, this artifact would give you slivers, and this like just a big log. It's not the most, it's the least in and of itself. It's not a very exciting, artifact, but it is a representative of this lost post office. It has this weird history about his name. And to make it more fun, we turned him into a character. This is Posty.
So this is a cartoon of a little log post. He's wearing a name tag that says Posty. He's got little arms and a smile and a face, and then he's wearing the little visor, and he has his mail bag with pieces of mail flying out of it. He says, "Hi, I'm Posty." This is amazing. And he's all over the place, I'm noticing.
We made him like your little guide for fun facts, and we thought he might appeal to kids a little bit. And so he's there to kind of tell you these fun facts as you go through, and he was a way to enliven our artifact there that just looks like a log. And by the way, we didn't know, we named him Posty, and then it turns out in Britain, that's what a postal carrier is, a postie.
There's also a place for kids and the young at heart to try their hand at being a postal worker.
We did we had a little interactive here for kids, so we've had fun. We worked a little bit with the actual post office, and so they got us an official mail carrier's sack and some other stuff, so kids can come in here and stamp the mail and weigh it and try to sort it.
Oh, that's fun.
And it has a little lesson here about
the zip codes?
Zip codes, because that's another thing, that zip codes did not come into being until like 1963. And before that, you were really dependent on like the mail clerks. They really had to have an immense amount of, it wasn't just like, oh yeah, the numbers and you have them. You had to know the towns and
which street, where they comparison to each other.
And the mail routes. Right, it wasn't as systematized, so you really had to be like on it and really just have all this information kind of more in your head.
So are kids actually like writing out on envelopes and addressing them?
Making their own envelopes.
So this is a skill that many people who are younger do not have, right?
Right. Where do I put the stamp? Where do I write the address?
Where's the return address?
Sure. It's amazing. I mean, it's so different. As I said, it's hard to imagine the difference between the world in which the post office played this huge role and the world we're in today, and not knowing how to mail a letter.
Yeah.
It's a different thing.
Well, you're doing good work then if you're teaching children how to mail a letter. Or not even children. I'm sure there's some young adults who are like, I have no idea.
That's true.
Stanley says there is something special about a photo of the inside of the 1910 Santa Rosa Post Office.
This is a behind-the-scenes photo at the post office, and there aren't many of them. So, there are a million photos of the exterior of this building, and there's so few. And it's like, it's very nice to see. Here's the behind-the-scenes operation. This is literally, this guy is like standing right there.
Right there. Yeah, except it's the placement of this photo is where that guy is, right there.
Window is. Yeah. And one of the weird things in our building too that I don't get to show very often is this would have been the main service window. So if you stand right there. Yeah. See?
It's divot, but this is marble.
Yeah.
There's a divot, two divots for the 2 feet.
Yes. So that's where, I know, thousands upon thousands of people shuffling in here and wore that into the marble. So it's kind of permanently imprinted. Yeah, I know, your feet just fall right into it, right? Yeah. You're like, oh yeah, of course.
Wow, that's really neat.
Yeah.
Is that do people know that they can come and do that?
Well, we actually, because it's so behind the desk, we actually just moved the desk over.
You can learn more at museumsc.org. Full disclosure, the Museum of Sonoma County is an underwriter for KRCB. However, they did not ask us to cover this exhibit on the 707. It was my history-loving, nerdy heart that made the ask. I'm your host and producer of this program, Michelle Marques. This show is a service of NorCal Public Media. Our president and CEO is Darren Lachelle.